Good evening and welcome, everyone. This is the fifth town hall meeting by the St. Paul's Committee. This evening we will have members of the St. Paul's Committee present the three concepts researched for the repurposing or demolition of St. Paul's main building. The three concepts that will be presented include demolition, facadism, and adaptive reuse. We will have professional members of the committee, engineers from Fort Thomasetti, and environmental legal counsel from Cullen and Dyckman present the aforementioned concepts and answer questions at the end of the presentation. This evening, we will also discuss why a professional cost estimator is needed, what does a cost estimator do, and the number of cost estimates required to determine the proposed project's cost. Thornton Thomasetti and other members of the committee will address developing a cost estimate by a professional cost estimator for the concepts proposed. I would also like to acknowledge the members of the committee who have spent hundreds of hours conducting resident outreach, doing research, and preparing drawings for St. Paul's main building, needing to educate our residents as to what may be possible. We owe all our resident volunteers a debt of gratitude for all their efforts. I would now like to introduce Frank McDonough, Chairman of the Program and Use Committee, to begin the presentation. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Cosmo, and welcome everyone to the 5th Town Hall. Tonight's purpose is to create a baseline for all residents who are not able to attend all of the prior 4 Town Halls, and to allow a dissemination of information in a more summary form. We will then get into issues of questions and answer, and then talk about next steps, which is all involving cost estimation and other considerations. One of the things I'd like to point out is please make sure you have one of the packets that we prepared at the front door. In those packets you'll get a feel for the amount of research our committee has done over the last 11 months, as well as sources of information for your own investigation. I would highlight 2 pieces. One is the Atlantic article that talks about the most important thing you can do as a parent for your children. And the answer, without giving away the article, is picking the village in which you live. And I think that's very appropriate for the discussion we're having at St. Paul. The second area of information I think you should pay considerable attention to is the piece on economic research and how areas such as demolition, facadism, and adaptive reuse have impact on your home value. We're going to proceed quickly tonight so we can get to the questions and answers. We're going to move to the legal issues on permitted use. Then we're going to get into demolition, then facadism, and then adaptive reuse. Let me introduce Peter Cole, who will talk briefly on permitted uses and the implications of the parkland designation of the St. Paul's property. Peter?
Okay. Now I can hear. Sorry. Good evening. As you know, this property has been owned by the village since 1992. But in 2004, it was declared parkland. Parkland restricts the use fairly dramatically from what it could have been used for when first acquired. So now, whatever uses it is to be put to, if it is to be put to use, has to be consistent with recreation and parkland aesthetics, which restricts most commercial use, actually restricts the municipal uses, such as putting a library or a school there. So what we've done, we've tried to address uses. You'll see those in your packet. You'll hear them presented tonight. We'll try to determine whether or not it can be used in the fashion proposed. Many of the ones proposed over the years are not permitted. But are permissible. So there is that restriction, and there is a way to lift the restriction, but that requires you to go to Albany, get home rule legislation, and go through that process. And what we have tried to do is go through a planning program that would not require us to get involved in all. If you have questions about uses, that'll be at the end too. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ryan Mulroney. I'm on the St. Paul's Committee, head of the Finance Subcommittee. To start the program tonight, we're going to talk about demolition, and we thought it was important to have independent third parties come here and talk about demolition. It seems simple, demolition compared to facadism and adaptive reuse, but there are a number of issues that have to be addressed. The first is engineering and architecture. We have James Farrell and Charles Van Winkle from Dorn Tomasetti to talk about that. After that, we have environmental and legal issues. We have Brendan Mooney from Pelham Dykeman to discuss that. And finally, once there is a demolition, there has to be some type of plan for after the demolition. And Bill Cool is here to talk about landscaping and a park after the demolition. So I'll introduce James and Charles.
Thank you very much, everybody. My name is James Morriborn, Managing Principal at Dorn Tomasetti. My expertise is in demolition, forensic engineering, and the like. And just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the various ways. So outside, we've got a bunch of different schemes involved in saving various walls, I shapes, C shapes, and so forth. And really what needs to be done in order to do that, it's not as simple as just tearing out a building. If you're going to save the facade, right, you need to figure out exactly how you're going to brace it, how it needs to be supported. You need to put all that bracing in, weave it through the existing structure, doing select demolition into foundations, which you have to put into the ground. And then once you've got the facade supported, then you need to systematically take down whatever portions of the structure you need to take down without impacting the bracing and all the other work that you've done. And then if you plan on rebuilding something back, you need to build up around all this bracing, tying in the exterior facade wall that you're saving. Almost like if you've seen the Hollywood sign in California. That's basically what you're looking to do with this facade. And then you need to tie this existing facade back into the new structure and then take down all the bracing and so forth. And do this in amongst the construction and demolition and the like. And that takes time, it takes planning. You need to understand the construction, you need to understand the state of the facade. Is the facade in good condition or poor condition? You actually need to do some rehabilitation of the facade in order for you to go in there and actually do bracing. Is the mortar joints okay? Is it a stable structure? So you might actually have to do some work prior to even going in there to do the bracing and so forth. And then you need to systematically take it down without damaging the facade. And doing all of that, and it takes time, it takes planning. You need to bring on a competent demolition engineer, a demolition contractor working in conjunction with the demolition engineer to come up with a plan, means and methods of exactly how you're going to do this systematically from start to finish to make sure that you can look at and figure out any contingencies or any other plans in case something should not go according to plan. And I'll let Chuck talk a little bit about the architectural involvement.
Thank you, James. Charles Van Winkle, Dorn Tomasetti. I've been with the company for 17 years. I specialize in restoration. So in this case, I think the discussion is ultimately potentially demolition, facadism. So I deal with aspects of salvaging buildings as well. So a recent project up in Harlem worked on because we actually took apart this tower and to reconstruct it. I know we're having a discussion about facadism, but there are potentially valuable historical elements inside this building, such as I think the walls are lined with terracotta. There's a really beautiful cast iron staircase, doors with doors, and then the structure of the building itself is actually probably fairly valuable, which is all heavy timber wood framing, which is actually goes for a pretty penny. So that process of what's inside the building complicates the demolition or the facadism aspect of the project. I think with that too, what some of the process is, chain of commands with the contractors and who's going to be buying materials, putting the log together and logging it and trading it and so forth. So it's a big process. I answered Q&A towards the end of the session.
Thanks, guys. Brendan, one more.
Thank you. My name is Brendan Mooney. I'm an attorney in the Environmental Practice Group at Cullen Beckman. We've been asked to provide guidance to the village on the review that would be required for the St. Paul's project under the State Environmental Quality Review Act. And I've had the opportunity to participate in the past two town halls. And what I try to do is give the attendees a high-level overview of the secret process and the timing involved in that process. So what I described was the fact that early on in that secret process, the village is going to have to make a determination. And under secret, it's called a significance determination. And what it has to do is answer this very simple question is whether or not the project as proposed would result in potentially significant adverse environmental impacts. And if the answer to that question is no, the environmental review is essentially done, and it's a very quick process, and the village issues what's called a negative declaration. On the other hand, if the village determines that there could be potentially significant adverse environmental impacts associated with the project, it issues what's called a positive declaration. And associated with that, or what would be required of that, is that the village prepare what's called an environmental impact statement. And that's significant because of the process involved and the length of time that is required to prepare an environmental impact statement. So, I explained further about the fact that in 2009, the village had considered demolition of the St. Paul's building. And as part of that, seeker was involved, and as part of that seeker review, the village determined that there would be potentially significant adverse environmental impacts, in part because the building itself is on the Registry of National Historic Places. And the village determined that there could be significant impacts to historic resources because as a result of demolition. So an environmental impact statement was required. And that process from start to finish took about 2 years. So it was a lengthy process back in 2009 to prepare the environmental impact statement, the draft environmental impact statement, and culminating with the issuance of a final environmental impact statement. So that process is significantly different than if the village were to determine that the project, whichever of the three alternatives proposed, would not have a significant adverse environmental impact. A very short process associated with the issuance of negative declaration as compared to a potentially very long process associated with the preparation of the environmental impact statement. The other thing that I talked about was, well, okay, if we have this environmental impact statement that was prepared back in 2009, the issue was raised, well, can we reuse that environmental impact statement for demolition? And the answer is it really depends. There's been a significant amount of time that has passed since 2009. The village would have to look at whether the project that's currently proposed is different from what was proposed back in 2009. The village would have to look at whether there are changed circumstances around St. Paul's that need to be evaluated. And the village would have to look at whether there's any new policies, laws, rules, regulations that need to be considered as part of the environmental review. So the village may want to consider doing what's called a supplemental environmental impact statement if demolition was the alternative that's selected. And a supplemental environmental impact statement is very similar to your standard environmental impact statement, although some of the process is truncated. There's a little bit less process involved with a supplemental environmental impact statement. But you would want to look at all the things that have changed between now and 2009 and all those other changes that should be factored into the environmental review. So there's essentially 3 different alternatives that I discussed. It could be outcomes as a result of the secret review. It could be a negative declaration, which very quick process. There could be a full environmental impact statement, which is a longer process, or there could be what's called a supplemental environmental impact statement, which is somewhere in between. So I wanted to make sure that the folks that are here tonight have an understanding of the fact that there is an environmental review that is required regardless of the alternative that is selected, and the length and the amount of process involved depends in large part upon whether or not the village determines that the project could have a significant environmental impact. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the next presenter, but I'll be available for questions later on.
Yes, I'm the next presenter. My name is Bill Poole. I'm a landscape architect. I've been practicing for over 55 years and have provided consulting services for projects in the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and across the United States and Canada. Representative projects have included corporate headquarters, college facilities, hospitals, downtown redevelopment, and streetscapes, and most of the ones I've done on 7th Street, Mineola, and New Hyde Park, and many parks, including samples on Long Island, master plan for Mississauga River State Park, work at Bailey Arboretum, work at Sunken Meadow State Park, and tonight we're going to describe, let me just get around here one so a proposed design for the site of St. Paul's. You may be familiar, the entrance into this area is off of Stewart, and there's a road that comes in, and it's sort of a crazy little road that does here that doesn't really do anything, so this, I'm proposing, whoops. Oh, there you go. So I propose that there's a little bit of parking here. It seemed to make more sense to sort of have this just come up, and if you can go back again, go ahead. And expand the parking and make a little cleaner entryway into the site. There's another entrance to the site off of Rockaway in here, and then this additional parking. And then if you go around, there's a proposed additional parking here. The park itself, based on the input we got from residents over time, the desire was to have a park that was passive, that you had trails that you could walk through, sitting areas, and it is, as designed, can be fully handicapped accessible. So if you look, since this is along Rockaway, these we sort of kept the open lawn areas and buffer areas. They can be used for picnics, it can be just sitting, kids can play catch here, so that it becomes a sort of a buffer area. And then as you move inside, this was actually, the way this is shaped is based on the former shape of the building. This would be the east wing of the building, and this is about halfway into the main building itself, because this would, if demolition proceeds, this is all going to be a deep excavation area here, so it seems an opportunity to capitalize on that and create a nice water feature. There's a little bridge to carry over there. This would be a little island area. I suspect if we build this pond, we're going to have the east moving in, so this could be an area where they could hang out. And then as you go around these different trails, I can't see so well, but there's benches located in a lot of little shaded sitting areas as you move around. And around the water feature itself, a little overlook area where people can come up and look in. And this would be, here's another one here, there's one down here. So there's a series of those around the water feature. And this would provide an opportunity to peer into here. This could have be stocked. We could have water lilies in here. There's a feature. Have a koi or something similar for him there. Over here, I propose just a little preschool play area, and this would be a little further where people can sit and observe and watch the area. And then down here is just a potential little area for horseshoes and bocce. In terms of the overall landscaping, there could be a variety of trees in here, but this also could act as a little mini arboretum if we wanted to go in that direction. So it could provide educational opportunities, walking around to learn about different plant materials and the different conditions that they can function under. Ultimately, obviously, we you have to provide some handicap parking for these, for access to the park, probably some here, and some right here. That would be worked out once we know what the actual requirements would be. And I think, just to summarize that, that's pretty much it. We would have obviously lighting put into space in here as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. We just thought it was important to show some kind of vision or plan for after demolition. It sounds simple, but there are a number of issues obviously we have to address. And I do want to thank Jonathan Martin from Houston's Purpose Committee who spearheaded the demolition project in the Houston Purpose Committee. I'll bring Frank back for the Facadism.
Thank you, Ryan. So we finished the first part of our presentation on our path forward on demolition. I'd like to talk now on Facadism. I'd like also to remind you that all of the material that we've gone through for the last 11 months is available to you on our website. So if you go to the village website and then get down to St. Paul, you'll find all of this material, and hopefully that'll give you a fuller view. And for those of you who are more ambitious, you can look at some of the videos we posted. Those videos are taken on the prior town halls in case you missed them. Let's talk a little bit about Facadism. Facadism is a long-respected architectural and construction technique. Generally, though, it has been held mostly in the private sector. The reason it's in the private sector is Facadism and the saving or preservation of the fronts of various buildings has often been triggered by a extra bonus in terms of buildable site square footage. And so there's an incentive for private builders to save facades. It wasn't as obvious in the public sector. Here in Garden City, we actually confronted Facadism early when Matrix and Avalon Bay, recognizing the interest in the facade, and thought that they could save it and then have larger facilities behind. In 2018, we saw Facadism as part of a sports complex, hockey and soccer. And I'd like to thank more recently John Schweer, Trustee Kelly, and FABGC leader McLeod for their suggestions on what we're going to present tonight. There is an important issue on Facadism. Here's a successful example of Facadism in a structure very similar to St. Paul's. And you can see there's a nice combination of the old and the new. And that's what you were trying to do. Facadism, however, before you get there, is going to require a fair amount of engineering. And our engineering team, led by Joe DeBoer, will talk about that in a moment. What's important, though, is that as we look at the examples we're talking about tonight, is two things. Number one, everything that we do in the historic review of permitted uses can be used in both a facade case or in an adaptive review case. They're the same. The difference is in a facade case, you're taking down a building and you're putting up a new building. In the adaptive reuse, you're just using the old building. But that's an important consideration. What we're going to show tonight is one that's gathered a lot of attention in our meetings on Tuesday night, which is a facade with a covered turf field and then a performing arts center associated with that. So when we get to the architectural piece, you'll see that. But don't forget that if that is not an alternative that the residents want, and they want Facadism, all the permitted uses that the legal committee has designated as appropriate can be put in the facade case. Before we get there, though, we have a lot of engineering to do. And because this is a 19th century structure, let me let our engineer, Joe DeBoer, talk you through the process of coming up with a facade plan. Joe?
Good evening. We did an outline to show what the impact would be structurally on the facade if we were to proceed with facadism. And the main case with St. Paul's is the shaping. Because we have these long, narrow sections that comprise the E or C, whichever you choose, the structure has to be maintained in the sense that we're going to carry the entire facade and the mansard, which is this portion right up here. If you look at a section of the building, and we cut, if you took a slice of the building this way and looked at it from the side, that's what you would see. We have to build a framework behind it, and this is dovetailing into what James said from what Tom said, that you integrate this new structure, weave it into the existing building, and it would have to extend up to the top, and you grab the mansard roof that you see in the existing school that is facing us today. That would all have to be comprehensive and wrap around the entire building. This gray area right here is the present corridor. The distance of structure that's needed to go from the corridor to the front is this space right in here, the hatched area. So this would all be remaining with the structure that would support the facade and the mansard. The net result is you're doing all of this just to remove this. And that kind of outweighs the benefits to some extent. Financially, we have no idea what it would involve, but the effort involved to go through all of this to just remove this is really how it's going to be evaluated. At the end of the whole story, you'll be left with the facade. How it gets wrapped around, how you integrate the clock tower will all have to be engineered, and it becomes quite extensive when you do have to build that structure within the existing structure to maintain its stability and to hope that it just stays in one piece as you go through the process. And that would be required before you can start to disassemble the rest of the building. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. You want to go? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Will Elise, and I'm a registered architect and a resident of Garden City. What I'd like to do is show you a floor plan of what facadism might entail. And the advantage to facadism is that in effect, you do retain a portion of the existing building, and that could be used to respond to all the mixed uses that the village has been asking for. What we've been getting from our users is a need for a turf field and also an auditorium. Those have been two prevalent requests. And if they were to be accommodated, we put them into a floor plan so you get a vision of what that could entail. So let me get that pointer. Is that handy, Bill? Thank you. So the blue is basically that hatched area we saw in Joe DeBoer's plan, which was previously. This white area is the remainder, which is used. And then here's your turf field. And within this box, there's an auditorium here that can accommodate, we're trying to get about 300 people. That's a base number, with a decent stage and everything else. This area here is for support space, which would entail, things like bathrooms, lockers, everything that a sports facility would require. There's been talk about putting in a swimming pool instead. That came very recently, but that theoretically could take the place of the field. And in effect, you could do any athletic facility you wanted to. What we were given as a request was study of turf field, and that's what this implies. It extends fairly long. These are the cottages, which we anticipated would probably get demolished, and the Department of Recreation would relocate here. So whether that will be accomplished or not remains to be seen. But if not, this will require extensive parking facilities. So I suspect the parking will be developed here. That's really it for the facade, and again, we'll be available for questions after.
Thank you, Will. My name is Bill Gary, and I serve as the chairman of the Historic Research Subcommittee. And this phase of the evening's program, we're going to transition to adaptive reuse. That's the Facadism representation with the new building behind, with an attempt to make the architectural enclosures on the rear sides look consistent with the facade architecture. Good. Okay, adaptive reuse. How did we get here? First thing we did was to attempt to answer the question, what do we know about St. Paul's? From January through March, we did lots of research, consulted with our village historian, Bill, past and present, village archives, external sources, New York history organizations, and the like. In March, we heard from Paul Goldberger. He had become aware of the initiative to examine our approach, or our goal to make a decision about what to do about St. Paul's. Mr. Goldberg wrote to us and said, and I quote, "St. Paul's School is far more than a landmark in Garden City. It is one of the great works of Gothic revival in the United States. And along with the Cathedral of Incarnation, it stands as one of the key buildings by the American architect John Cullen and the British architect Henry G. Harrison. St. Paul's is a monumental civic building in the very best sense, in that it is a work of great architecture built for public, not a private purpose. And like all great public architecture, it inspires us with the potential of buildings to enhance the idea of community. St. Paul strengthens the identity of Garden City as a unique place with unique history. There is no doubt that the reuse of a building like St. Paul's presents an enormous challenge, but it is also a great opportunity for Garden City to create a public facility that will be like none other anywhere, and that will make Garden City an even more special community than it is now. So this came from Mr. Goldberger. So who is Mr. Goldberger? Paul Goldberger is the New School's Joseph Urban Professor of Design and the former architecture critic for both the New Yorker and the New York Times, where his architecture criticisms were awarded the Pulitzer Prize. Paul is one of the nation's most respected architecture critics. As I like to point out, this statement summarizes virtually all of the research we did about the St. Paul's building and its historic significance. Again, like Frank mentioned, I want to reference the handouts. A lot of the research, virtually all of the research is listed in here. Most anything you find here, or that we refer to in our remarks, is going to be in here, including, and this is an illustrative list, because the next question we set out to answer was, what are the issues in evaluating the economics of preservation? Again, from January through September, we explored numerous sources, academic papers, guidebooks mostly, on the community impact of historic preservation projects. Again, this is a list. They're listed in your reference. You can reach out to them. They go back in time, and there are so many recent examples. What did this research tell us about historic preservation projects? Among many benefits from these projects, the primary ones are, one, increased property values. But in this research, in each case example, the impact on property values was positive. In none of the case examples were it negative. In some cases, property values increased dramatically when combined with the creation of historic or heritage district. That's essentially what the research says. In nearly all cases, preservation was environmentally better for the community. And I can imagine if you appreciate what we would go through in this town with demolition, or partial or actual or full, there would be some significant environmental impact, at least temporary. Historic building restoration should be viewed as an investment. I know we like to talk about cost and expense and the like, and that's all extremely important. But if you look upon it as an investment where you're getting a return, that's where you begin to see the value. The project should include a trackable rate of return model, rate of return of investment model. The premise for adoptive reuse is that the project yields value to the community. Okay, let's transit to the uses. Many of you see these. This is all in your handouts. Let me just comment quickly on the process. What process did we pursue to establish preferred uses for the building? And what was the timeline for that process? Preferred uses could not be assessed, essentially, until two major milestones in our process were achieved. Number one, receipt of an engineering report establishing that the building is structurally sound and ready for restoration. For this, we relied on the structural engineering reports from Thomas Setti from a few years ago. And as well, an in-depth visit and inspection of the building done there, and 3 of our committee members who are architects and engineers. This took place in the spring. The outcome of those analyses were, the conclusion was made that the building is sound and is ready for restoration if the village chooses to restore it. The second milestone that we had to achieve was the discussion on the legally permissible uses under parkland. This was analyzed and clarified for us in July, and therefore, knowing that the building was essentially sound, if we cared to restore it, and that we understood what was, at least on the threshold level, permissible, we could go ahead. We had done extensive research on uses, and outreach was undertaken. All prior requests for uses were retrieved from the village archives. And again, in the handout, you'll see all of the work that was done previously on this subject. And as to outreach, beginning in June, we met with 40 different community organizations to listen and assess their preferred needs. However, it was only in August that we could begin in earnest to assess the needs and translate these needs into uses. This is listing of those community organizations that we spend time with, including multiple visits with many of them. So there's a couple things to note about land. Unallocated spaces. We're about to step into the plans. So you'll see before, Will's going to cover that in essence. But in those plans, you'll see some unallocated places. We recommend that this space be set aside for future uses. In our research and our outreach, we uncovered many worthy ideas and needs that were questionably permissible under strict New York State parklands criteria. So we decided to declare it. In the future, those options may be something that the village wants to pursue, and there will be space to accommodate them. Second note, this is on adaptive reuse budget. The committee recommends that if adaptive reuse option is selected, that the village establish a spend plan that is not to be exceeded in phase 1 without additional authorizations. So what that means is, with the adaptive reuse option, the work and the plan can be suspended, curtailed, or phased if the budget limit is approached. This obviously would not be true if you started down the path for demolition and you discovered something that caused the cost to explode. Once you start down the path, in the case of demolition, you really can't stop. Okay, with those 2 notes mentioned, I think, Will, it's your turn to kind of go through the plans as we see them at the moment.
Thank you, Bill. All right, this is a truncated plan, and unfortunately, unfortunately with the lights on, the color coding isn't that evident, but blink a little maybe it'll work. But basically, this is the ground floor plan of St. Paul's. The black lines are indicative of all of the existing walls. There are dotted lines. Thank you. There are dotted lines, for example, here, which are indicative of walls that we're recommending demoing. And there's red lines, which are indicative of construction. Here is that corridor that Joe DeBoer made mention of that needs to be retained. So there's limitations in terms of space planning. Essentially, we have the ability to work this way and make rooms bigger, such as this, or narrower, such as this. But what we cannot do is demo this corridor without extending significant structural expense. So we made a plan and we tried to do that. And in doing that, what we found, this building was built in 1870. So as impressive as the terracotta, minted tiles are, etc., what's not impressive is its response to today's ADA codes, etc. So we've had to update the building with ramps, larger elevators, new bathroom facilities, etc., to meet a modern building's needs. So, for example, this elevator right now is enlarged, as is this one, and there's a proposal for a new one here. However, there are some features that still, the glory of the building is still maintained, such as when you come in, you have this beautiful grand staircase with iron grillwork that gives way to a cafeteria space, which we're proposing can be retained as an eatery of some sort, but that's got everything from murals to Corinthian columns. And then these two reception rooms are fairly impressive, and what we thought we could do with them is create a community center where these rooms would be used for exhibit halls, or this could be a permanent collection for the history of St. Paul's or Garden City. This could be for temporary exhibits from student projects to adult works. What's shown here is a request we received for an urban learning center. The reason I'm taking note of it is if we were to do it, it should be on the ground floor for ease of evacuation purposes. But it does entail rooms for special needs kids. And, here's the bathroom facilities, etc. It's basically using all the existing walls where we can. Similarly, on this side, we start getting other uses that are Department of Recreation. And, Bill, could you go to the next slide? Do you know how to? Hold on. That's okay. All right. Now, this is the same floor plate, but you'll notice there were two empty infills. The building is shaped like an E. Here is an idea where we take the infills and we actually fill them in. And there's an option where we do that theater that we showed in Facadism, was first introduced as a potential theater here. And the advantage here is that you've got 3 walls of the theater are existing. So you only really need to add these red walls here. And similarly, you have this area, which there's a separate proposal that this could be a courtyard. And this courtyard could have walking paths, etc., for special needs. But essentially, you go to the theater, you have a bite, you take it out into the courtyard. It's a nice evening out. As far as the courtyard itself, it can be used for multiple reasons, such as picking up your children, etc. So it has extensive use. This is just a pergola entrance that kind of mimics this one. This would be a vestibule, a ticket office, and a sound and light area. Very quickly, I don't want to go through every floor that's been displayed before. I just wanted to show, if we were to go upstairs, you would see how these functions continue. The Department of Recreation is on this half with dance rooms, music rooms. This area is really performing arts and administration. This area are static. We have science labs, robotics, Lego room, etc. So all the functions that are currently crowded into Blue Hall are then brought into the building. That's an idea, it doesn't have to be that, but we tested it to see if it worked, and you can see it does. The blue are multi-purpose rooms, and basically the center portion of the building can be retained for a community center. These multi-purpose rooms could be rented, not rented, but reserved for Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, et cetera. So, we struggle every time we want to have a room, whenever we want to have a function such as this, etc. This can be met in this building. This is the existing chapel, and the idea is just to restore it. It's got, the disadvantage to the previous schemes is that we're demolishing portions of the building, but the chapel definitely has to go. It can't survive the intrusions. And the chapel itself, not for religious use, but it would make a beautiful recital hall. It has Tiffany windows, etc. So it's worth retaining. This is what that would start looking like. There's the garden here. And this would be the theater infill here. So this is St. Paul's from the back. And you're really keeping the building as it currently is on the exterior. There's another option, this is back on the ground floor, where we take these two infills and we dedicate it to athletic fields. And as far as athletic fields, you're seeing here one small soccer field. I don't think it reads very well, but there's a blue tennis court, so you could do one or the other. You could do both, maybe one becomes a pool. It could be, all these can be priced with the cost estimator and estimated. The athletic is shown in green, and the reason I mention that is if we go to the next slide, which is the basement slide, you'll see all these are athletic facilities. You can see the green, but there's weight rooms, cardio rooms. This is the weight room here. Cardio, these are locker and shower rooms. So these can all be allocated to the village. The rest of this center portion is largely mechanical, electrical, IT. There's an emergency area in case there's an emergency in the village, and other companies come from, or rescue missions come from other towns, etc. This is where they could be allocated space. So these really kind of work for both facadism and for adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse has the advantage that you have both corridors being used. And the advantage to that is that you don't have to build all the way up. If your budget only allows for the ground floor to be done day one, that's what you do, and then day two, you do the others. And it may be more contentious as you try and decide what functions you want. You may not be there yet on day one. But in the future, you may say, you know what we need the senior center should go there. Then you can do it. The other thing to bear in mind is there are some on the upper floor, some very dramatic double-spaced rooms, which would make fantastic reception halls. It's underneath the mansard, etc. So, there's great potential on the upper floors as well. I'm just not getting into this level of detail. And that's it. I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Rita.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's the question. How much does it cost? I don't know. And none of us can know yet. And the reason we can't know yet is because we need a cost estimate. Look to your left, look to your right, and in your life's experiences, you have been a cost estimator. You go into a car dealership and you say, okay guys, what options do I run on it? Well, can I afford it? Maybe yes, maybe no. When you went to buy your house, you said, am I buying the Taj Mahal? How many kids am I going to have? Do I want to have the bedrooms for all the kids that I think I may have? That's part of being a cost estimator, in which you have to evaluate your choices and then decide what is affordable and what is not. You've now already seen many different options. Cost estimating is not the end of the process, it's the beginning of the process, in which we then, and the we is you, make a decision on what this eventually will look like. Cost estimator, this is a case that I went into litigation about because, as you might expect, there was an oops. They built a building next to a building, and it really went down south. So the purpose of a cost estimator was to decide what would be the expense involved in rebuilding what it is. Okay? A cost estimator takes plans, takes photographs, does an inspection, and takes what you provide to that person apart and put numbers to it. If you demolish a building, that is one set of numbers. If you do a facade, that's a different set of numbers. You have to quantify what you intend to do, how you intend to do it, and what would be the outcome. Clearly, depending on what you're going to put in for a facade, what is that new structure, that has a cost. Similarly, if you do adaptive reuse, what would be the expense incurred in fixing up the building? Are you going to do 1 floor, 2 floors, 3 floors? Only by getting the initial building blocks do you have some area of deciding what you're going to do. Cost estimator. Somebody said, well, I want to have a pool. Okay. Cost estimator gives you some numbers for a pool. It may be within your budget, it may not be. But you go through all of the items that are inside the building, what you want to put in the building, what you want to take out of the building, and you come up with numbers. Now, fortuitously, this is done on spreadsheets, digitally, so the numbers that you have can be utilized to evaluate the cost of different functions, whether it be adaptive reuse, whether it be demolition, or whether it be facades. The cost estimator in the beginning will give you rough numbers, because that is only the beginning part of the process. You then have the design and development phase. If you're saying to yourself, I'm going to take the building down and demolish it, they'll be able to say, okay, we're going to need this many truckloads, and we're going to take this many truckloads, and we're going to send them to where? I don't know. Probably going to be New Jersey, could be Pennsylvania, could be Ohio. So the cost estimator would then say, if this is one of your options, we'll figure it out for you. If you're going to do facadism, they will say, well, we don't need that many truckloads. We've already figured out for demolition. But you still need that number. Then you're going to wind up saying, okay, what would be the expense of building out? What do you have? construction to put together. So you never have a set of circumstances that you have, excuse me, the design development phase, the construction phase, and then you wind up having construction drawings. Each one of these stages has different sets of numbers. As you go through each one of these sets of numbers, that will then tell you what parameters you have, what choices you have, what you want to pay for, and what you can't. Eventually, the village has to make a determination as to what are the options, what do they look like, and what do they cost. If you want to go cross-country, the first thing you got to do is put gas in the tank. Then what you got to do is say, am I going over the George Washington Bridge? Am I going to go over the Prospect Bridge? Am I going to go through the Lincoln Tunnel and whatever else? All of those are decisions that you will have to make by using a cost estimator to figure out what this journey looks like. The journey starts with a cost estimator to give you an idea of what you can and what the task is and where you're going. Thank you.
I think, Frank, you want some closing words?
Thank you very much. We've done a lot of work in an hour. We now have time for questions, and questions will be handled by Tom O'Brien. In terms of next steps, we will be joining our committee, assuming there is a cost estimator at some future date, whenever the board decides that's appropriate. We will be convening to look at and work with the cost estimator and convening other regular town halls. And of course, we have our regular weekly Tuesday meeting to keep people apprised of what's going on. Let's open for questions and have Tom O'Brien monitor that. Tom.
Thank you, Frank. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out today. I'm Tom O'Brien, trustee and deputy mayor. And I wanted to, first of all, recognize the 38 volunteers, your neighbors, experts in different areas such as legal, finance, engineering, and architecture that have spent all these hours on our behalf to make sure that we come to a conclusion on St. Paul's that you can vote on. So let's give them a hand. Their spouses, I haven't seen them in a few months now. They've made a lot of progress. And so I'm going to handle the questions tonight. I'm going to bring the mic around to each of you. All you have to do is raise your hand. And when I bring the mic to you, you're going to please state your name and your address. And I just have one rule, and I'm going to stick by it, and that's treat each other with respect. This can be an emotional issue for many of us. We've been waiting 30 years. We have opinions, but your opinions and thoughts are important, and the committee wants to hear it, as do I. But treat the committee and the others with total respect and the way you would like to be treated. Okay? That's the only rule I have. So with that in mind, I open it up to the floor, and please raise your hand. I'll bring the mic to you. Yes. Please state your name and address.
Anthony Sender Brown, 117 Hay Street. Don't throw it at my house. First, I would like to ask that we change the park designation, and how would we go about that, because that seems to be a problem.
Thank you, Anthony. Who would like to take that question? Do we have the mic?
You're going to go to Albany. It's been declared parkland. Once it's declared parkland, you can only use it for parkland purposes without authorization by a formal legislation from Albany. So if you, it is restrictive. I don't know that it's unduly restrictive, restrictive in such a fashion that people would like to see removed, you'd have to go there. Sure. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, the question from the floor is what going to Albany entails. And what it is a legislative process. The bill has to be passed approving what you propose to do. It has to be signed by the governor. As I understand it, we've talked to both our local representatives, of both our, excuse me, our assemblyman as well as our senator, and we would go to them with a proposal. Oh. Okay, you go to Albany with a proposal. They would then have to support it. We have not gone to them with any suggestion that we would want to declare something other than parkland or remove parkland designation. They would have to support it. And then once supported, you would go through committee. You'd have to get a majority of both the Senate and the Assembly, and then it would go to the governor's desk. Assuming it was 100% streamlined, fully supported, etc., that takes somewhere near a year. And if there's any opposition to it, one, it may never get passed, and two, you could prolong. So that's the best I can say. Yeah.
There's also an issue that one of the previous issues is that.
Yeah, what Bruce has said is that once you seek to use land other than parkland purposes, it is often a condition that you have to find other space to take its place. So, how much space would that be? That area with cottages, Fluid Hall, in St. Paul's is about 7 acres. So you have to find another 7 acres of comparable value somewhere within the village confines to substitute for. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, I'm going to see bird sanctuary 9 acres.
Right, but that's already, I don't know whether that's been declared part of that. So whether that be appropriate substitute, I don't know. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Ray Meyer, 85 Amherst Street. Just first, thank you to the committee. I work as a resident here and representing with a bunch of swim families here. We were late to the game after we saw the Facadism plan with the proposed turf field covered, and that got us organized. And so we don't have a structured affinity group that might have been reached out to because our swimmers swim for various teams, local clubs, high school, CYO, rec programs. So there's not like a Centennials or Rams or Thunder. I think we've now formulated into an affinity group. And so really because of the great volunteerism from some of those other affinity groups, from those other sports, exhibited, they have a structure and lines of communication. Thank you for giving us the time to talk to you at town halls on Tuesdays at 7. I guess I would ask that, whatever the end result is here, that we look further into the future. If a pool can't be part of the initial project, I'd ask for your commitment to work with us in the future at Fluid Hall or behind that area in the cottages. Because if it takes another 30 years, if I'm still in town, I'm still going to come asking for it. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just talk about topic too, since we're here? Same topics?
Sure.
Sean Tedesco, 112 Jackson Street. Just wanted to piggyback off of what Ray was saying. As a resident, someone who's been involved in aquatics for over 40 years, coaching various teams, running clinics and swimming clinics and things, but also volunteering I work with the CYO program at St. Anne's, stationed out of Chaminade. I work with a Landing Warrior Triathlon group that's swimed out of Nassau Aquatic Center. And there's a huge need. There actually is a very big following of swimming in this town. But as he was mentioning, they're swimming in all different locations in Long Island, trying to make it happen. We don't have a middle school team. A lot of other towns have middle school teams, but also not just for athletics, varsity athletics. The pool is a position or a place that can be used for all ages of people. From little kids who are learning to swim, all the way up through adult and older athletes who want to be able to swim, they can't run anymore, they can't bike anymore, and the pool can still be used for many various things. So I just want to make sure everyone understands there's definitely a big support and big community swimming in this town. I'd love to see the pool here. Thank you.
For many of us, I think she coached you, yeah, my kids as well. I'll stay in this island and work my way over you folks.
When Kate went voting on Rose Street. My question has to do, has the committee considered other demolition, looking at other revenue sources other than voting municipal bonds for this if we go forward? My suggestion is looking at maybe state grants, federal grants, maybe philanthropic, Elon Musk type of people who might want to put their name on the building.
That's a next step process for us, but we have been since we formed in January, have been looking at all kinds of sources, both grants, state, federal, philanthropy. There's a fairly strong philanthropic group within the village, and also in terms of areas in which we could have revenue or self-supporting type of activities. So that's a broad next step. We established what the cost estimate. Looking at this for about a year or so. Thank you for that.
Well, to see if Elon still has some money left.
Yeah.
Okay, just raise your hand, I'm going to the next row. Okay, I'm coming.
George Campbell, for St. Paul's Place. The goal of everything that's going on for 10 months is to get to a community vote as to up or down demolition or development of some kind. My question is, what is the path to get to that community vote? It seems to me like we're nowhere close or even dreaming of when that will happen and how will we get there. How are we going to go from what I would consider dozens and dozens and dozens of alternatives and put that onto a ballot someday? It seems to me we have too many wants and it hasn't been narrowed down to anything close to what would appear on a ballot. What would the ballot look like, for example? We'll just say, trust us, we'll just do something, or the ballot has specific final choices that are irrevocable. And what are the steps from today to that day of the vote, village-wide vote?
Thanks, George.
George. So, quick question. And the answer is next step.
Take it from Don.
Yep. Nope. Better.
Tom, give him the mic.
I'll bring my mic. Hold on.
Here's the answer, George.
I'll bring them up.
Same problem we had last time. It is better, George, here's the answer. This is a process. We've gone through the process of identifying needs, community. Is to
The next step is to buy a microphone that works. And a sound system that works. That'll be in our budget. Try it again. How's that? The next step, George, is to begin with a cost estimator that'll identify what the costs are on the desire that people have had and the feedback that we've gotten over the last 11 months. That will be circulated, and we will find a mechanism to start narrowing those costs down. And over this next process, we think that can happen somewhat rapidly. In the meantime, George, we will do an O&M study to see what each of the life cycle costs are for the projects that we talked about, so that you get not just the capital cost, but the overall operating and maintenance costs of what the project would be over its normal economic life. And present them to the residents and slowly narrow that down. What's the best method for that? There could be any number of methods, whether it's town hall, surveys, or other processes. It will not take that long, George. You and I have been at this for 30 years. We can do it sooner than that. And the process at that point will then go to a referendum when we narrow it down to an up or down, what kind of use versus a demolition. And credit Trustee Kelly, who suggested, let's come up with base cases as a starting point, which we will do. And at that point, the village residents can come in and indicate what their preferences are and start to narrow or create a priority for them. It's a process, but it's a process that everyone does when they, Trustee Carino said, had a car purchase or a home purchase or a home renovation. It isn't easy, but to get the village around the right set of uses is something that we will be committed to doing. Okay?
Can I just follow up? There's a survey in or out that's been proposed and rejected, proposed and rejected.
In fairness to the Board of Trustees, they have not rejected a survey. And let me just say this while we're all together. In the 30 years I've been dealing with trustees, this has never been a group who have been more dedicated to coming up with the bigger problems that this village is confronts than this group of trustees. Over the last several weeks, we have met with each of them individually for hours, addressing all of their concerns. And this is after they spent all their time on the volunteer firemen, on the firehouse, and several other major issues in the village. And then to tackle St. Paul. They've been an aggressive and ambitious program, but they've been at it every day like we have. And so, whether or not they get to an issue of survey or non-survey, we have enough anecdotal evidence to demonstrate where certain priorities are, and we can start narrowing that down. So it's not as difficult as you would suggest. We've been at it for 30 years. We'll get this done in the next 12 months. Next question?
Okay, George.
Good evening. Steve Gray. Since February 4th, 1977, I have been a resident of this wonderful village. My question is for legal. You mentioned if there is a positive declaration, then we have to go to some sort of a environmental impact statement. What is the likelihood of that happening if facade is considered? And what is the likelihood of that happening if renovation is considered? And are the timetables for those steps different for demolition, facade, and renovation? Could you please elaborate? Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Well, depending upon what the proposal is, the village is going to have to look at the proposal once they're developed.
You can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
The village is going to have to evaluate the proposal from a seeker perspective once the proposal is developed. At this point, at this juncture, the three alternatives are still being developed. And for me to speculate for me to speculate on what determination the village would make with regard to seeker on those three alternatives, being that they have not yet been fully developed, would be premature, and so I won't do that.
Frank Lavoni, 138 Washington Avenue. Do you believe that you have all the information that is necessary to give to the cost evaluator to give prices for these three proposals?
I believe we have substantial information. If you look at the information package that we left at the front door, there will be more than enough information and schematics that the cost estimator can begin with a reasonable estimate as to what the potential cost will be and allow those costs to be refined.
Have you asked the cost estimator to provide the village with a list of what items they need in order to prepare what's being requested of them?
As soon as the cost estimator is accepted by the Board of Trustees, we'll do that.
And I have a second question, please. With respect to adaptive reuse and facadism, do the plans that are currently prepared include everything, including mechanicals, wiring, windows, in essence, a complete package?
We do not have working drawings. We have schematics and elevations, but our construction team, who will be with us when we go through this with the cost estimator, will be able to help identify what those costs are and where they would be. So I feel that we have enough so far to help the cost estimator begin. But the issues of facadism or adaptive reuse, certainly there will be issues of mechanical, plumbing, and electrical, and I believe we're prepared to address that.
But we don't have them yet?
We do not have working drawings, that's correct. But on the schematics that we have, we can identify where those kinds of issues will be and allow the cost estimator to evaluate.
If I could just add a little bit on that, the way a construction project works, estimation is done at different phases of the work. We've completed a programming phase. The second phase is schematic design, which is this phase. This is the first phase that gets cost estimate. Later on, design development takes place. That's after you identify exactly what you're going to build. And you design the walls and everything that goes with it. That's when they start talking about mechanical and electrical in terms of infrastructure. But it's priced again to see if we're in line with the original budget. The third estimate is done in the next phase of construction, which is the construction documents that what Frank was alluding to. These are the drawings that actually, they're not the pretty pictures anymore. They're the specific detailed pictures that will show not just a wall, but what the wall material is, what the construction is, whether there's outlets in there, whether there's air conditioning vents, and everything else that goes into it, where they're located, etc. This, of course, will affect the cost. Very often it could come down. It's not necessarily going up each time. But the cost estimate is done on a regular basis to maintain an overall budget. And this is classic of any construction project, particularly one of this magnitude. So I hope that elaboration.
Hi, I'm Ed McCoy at 71 Kenwood Road. At this stage in the process, to support the idea of getting cost estimation on the swimming pool, what would an individual resident do? Would we join the affinity group that Ray was talking about, or is there something? What's the best way to provide input at this point?
We have a list from all the affinity groups, from all the contacts we've had over the last 11 months, and we will go through each of them, including the board, with the cost estimator.
If I could also add, the estimator has given a period of time that he wants to meet with the representative Thank you. To assess all the options. So if they're not including a pool, we tell them include a pool. And we tell them what kind of pool, where we go, etc. So that's all in the works. But there's I think it's from memory, I think it's a 70-day period where we're meeting on a weekly basis with the estimator and making sure he's taking into account all the alternatives, all the options that we're looking at, and pricing them correctly. The one thing I did mention before, there's value engineering, and that's usually done after the construction documents are all signed and sealed. And value engineering is a very significant exercise because that usually brings the cost down. So if the estimate came in at the end higher than anticipated, the value engineering effort will bring it down. So if we want to go leak on the ceiling, if someone can't afford it, it's going to have to be plain drywall and a lick of paint, and then that's imposed at that time.
That was such an important question on construction costs. Let me add one other issue on value engineering. If we were to go to we have one of the best value engineers on our team. He was not able to be here tonight, and he wasn't feeling well. But let me give you one example. When we went through the building, one of the earlier costs was to refinish and polish all the outstanding architectural woodwork. We immediately said, not necessary. Number two, there were all kinds of pockets and things that you would use to hide different electrical, mechanical, etc. The value engineer said, no need to spend that money. Let's use a WeWork kind of process so that the building itself becomes part of the design and you don't have to spend that. If you have a budget, as we will, we have to keep to the budget, be affordable, and make sure that there's value for the dollars that we spend.
Ready? Hi, my name is Evan Blum. I live in Creighton.
The mic up.
I'm in Creighton and Connecticut and Rhode Island. But that doesn't mean we don't have roots here. Part of our family, the second was developed Roosevelt Field, obviously. We all know who they are. And we've had some great friends and relatives. For example, Paul Rudolph was our family friend who designed the indoor laboratories, and family friends that operated them. And Howard, the late great Howard Gross, and so on and so forth. So we do have some roots here, so I'm not a total foreigner. However, I do would like to offer some suggestions, since I see things a little bit differently. I do see some possibilities that I think we should explore, or you guys should explore, the aspect of going to the state and getting things changed, because I don't think that's insurmountable, especially if you have a lot of residents with signatures and petitions and so forth. A lot of them agreeing and going up there and coming up with a better plan. I think you can probably get those restrictions limited or reversed to some degree, because look, we've overcome women's suffrage, we've repealed prohibition. This is just a building. So I don't think it's really insurmountable. So I would like to make a suggestion that maybe we should start that process in tandem with all your analysis of everything else you're doing. And this way something is moving forward, and maybe by the time you get through it, or maybe you reach analysis paralysis, I don't know. But I do know that maybe that event may come sooner, and maybe you'll have a more fruitful event, being able to do things, have a different vision for the building, and it may not cost the taxpayers any money. And you won't be saddled with all these bond issues and all this other stuff, that you might be able to just eliminate the cost factor, so there's no cost. And you might find a better use for the building that everyone would like. And I think that most people would like and agree with. It doesn't cost them anything, and it gets restored. What's there to object to? So, I don't know, maybe use. That's a different discussion, but at least you've accomplished saving the building, which I believe is a great work of art. It's a national treasure, whether you recognize it or not. It is, and it should be preserved. And so I think we put that on the link and figure out how to do this.
Thank you.
Just a suggestion. And then to help with,
Any other questions? Comments?
Yeah, any other questions?
Bring it over here.
Where?
Over here, Tom.
Let me just, okay.
I've attended all the presentations and I found them interesting information. Point in case, say that we did do the adaptive reuse, or possibly we never should. I'm looking one step into the future now. Say that the village has approved, say, adaptive reuse. Our annual budgets, the village budgets, will have to include hiring more staff for maintenance, for all these practical uses, for the adaptive use, for recreation, for tree trimming, for making sure that whatever ground is being done. And this is something that is not definitely what you people are discussing, but it's something that we as residents should think. Not only is there going to be a bond in the future, but our actual yearly budget, the village budget, will be affected with the increase because you're hiring more staff. Even though your ideas are great, but I want to present a more practical view to people. I'm probably going to be 6 feet under before all of this even gets started. So, I mean, you know.
So, Kathy, here's the answer to that. That's a great question.
And the answer to that is, every project has that type of issue. And what I said earlier is, we will be looking in this next phase, when we get the cost estimator, to look at what's called a life cycle cost. That is both the capital cost, what it costs to build it, and what it costs to operate and maintain it. So that is definitely part of the next process. And that way the village residents will know each of these alternatives, what that will mean on a practical, day-to-day budget for them. And I think people that then, particularly our seniors and new residents, will need to count. But I believe we will find a solution to make that affordable.
Other questions?
Hi, my name is Grace Chen, 34 Avalon Road. I want to know when will we have the budget, because every project budget is very important. I reviewed my house in 2021, and I know very well how to review a house, but this is obviously it's like 100 times bigger than a house. So what is our budget? Obviously, we can't say that my budget is, 10 million. Is what we're going to do for this thing, and also what's our plan and how we pay for it. Because some of us is worried, okay, I'm going to stay in this town for 6 years. When my kids go to college, I'm going to sell my house. Now you're going to increase 10% of my tax to pay for this project. I don't even benefit from it. I don't have kids go to swimming team, so now I have to pay for a swimming pool, right? Maybe, some people, they say, my kids play ice hockey. I'm going to install, ice cream for my kids, because different residents, they have different needs. So we can't be like, we meet everybody's needs, everybody's want. So I feel like when you have a budget, it would be important to know the budget. As earlier you mentioned, you could have a crystal light, or you just have an LED light. That makes big difference. And also, we want to know as a resident, current resident, what is the, if we go for this multi-use route, what the impact on the current residents, how much tax increase, I have to come out with to pay for this project. Thank you.
Very good question. And what we said is two things, right? Yes, that's the next step that we're going to evaluate to see what the cost is and the impact on each resident. And number two, the other thing we said is, when you proceed with a project like this,
You have to do it on what is affordable to the resident. What is affordable versus what Mr. Gary and others have said. If you look at the material and the research we have, this is an investment in the village just like the community park is. How much does that add to your home value? So we would have to be able to argue that the investment that we're asking for will increase your home value and therefore be affordable. So it has to be two things. Is it increasing your home value, and is it affordable on a day-to-day budget? So those are very good questions, and that's the next step.
Can I just address the last two? We do want to make sure that, and Mrs. Zorro, you pointed out, there are two parts of the equation. There's an A and a B cost, right? The A cost is the municipal finance cost of the project, what it costs to build or refurbish or open the facade of the case. The other aspect of that is the operating and maintenance, the ongoing operating and maintenance. Both are being accounted for. It really depends what the final plan is. And we're talking about taking surveys, and we're talking about this, we should have put out a survey before. I actually think the survey would be much more valid once we have the cost of all these individual projects projected, right? So just sending out a survey saying, what do you want? Do you want a pool? Do you want an indoor field? Do you want a theater? Do you want a weight room? Do you want a new senior center? Everybody's going to say yes, 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 yes. But if you have a line item cost or an estimated cost next to that, I think that survey or poll will be a lot more valid and a lot more practical. And that way we can come up with a final plan. As we said, there's two things. Is it legal? Is it practical? Is it affordable? If it's not affordable, it's a non-starter. You're not going to put a plan that's going to bankrupt people or chase people out of this town because they can't afford it. That's not the point of this. But we're going to need that cost estimation for all those line items to say, you know what, an indoor hockey rink is $45 million. That might not get a lot of yeses.
Any more questions? Hi, Frank. How you doing? We haven't talked in a little while. You guys have...
Seems like only yesterday.
Yeah. You guys have put on a great presentation, and I'm sure everyone appreciates it. But I'm falling in line with this young lady. Now, my question is a couple of folds. You indicate that as far as determination of whether something goes into the project or something out of the project is predicated on an investment in and a determination of the return on investment. My first question would be, who determines your return on investment, and how is that calculated?
Well, it's going to be unique to the community. In the research, don't suggest you know an expert in project return on investment, but in the research, it is specific to the community. So you can calculate property values over a certain period of time. And your community, you can calculate property value appreciation in like communities, ones with community centers, ones that don't have a community center. And then you can commit to a project. A return on investment is essentially an equation that's local to your community. We would probably, the village would almost certainly be hiring bond counsel and bond consultants, and this is something that falls into their domain.
Toward that end, and I've been in the village for 33 years or so, I've seen programs come and go. I've seen expenditures made on behalf of the village to make a determination as to finally what to do with the project. And all I see is a continuation of these expenditures. Right now, you just indicated that we will have to get people involved, and these people are not cheap. And again, I'm following this young lady's approach to life. Right now, we're facing an inflation factor. We're facing a water system that is virtually going to have to be redone. We're going to be facing all these additional costs that we all have to budget for, by the way. And at the end of the day, you still need to maintain a community here. Now, as this lady is saying,
She's not gonna have advantage of the pool system. She's not gonna have advantage of these things that you're asking her to support. And my question is, again, getting back to George is saying, where does this come back to us to say, we can afford some of this based on some determination, statistical analysis, or we can't? And my question, being a finance person you are, if you're going to do a presentation, then across the top, give us a list. Give us a list of costs to say, okay, we all want everything, regardless of the ice, but can we afford it? And my question here is, give me a Columbia presentation, give me an estimated price, because God knows you won't know, because the inflation is building up. And then we can judge. George, we can have George judge it. We can have the people of the community judge it. Can we use a pool? Yes, my kids did swimming as well. Do we need more sports? Well, do we need a STEM program or a STEAM program? Can we spend money actually regenerating the village such that our education, we are in competition with, we're in competition with many of the high schools that are now taking our students, and they're paying $7,000, $8,000, $10,000. And my son, we ship him off to BOCES. And I have other friends that will ship off. So, for long story short, as we look at your project, we are looking at people that have to deal with a budget for all their costs. And until you can put a Columbia presentation to say, okay, for the facade, how much is that going to cost? Is it possible? Or how much will it cost for the drama department? Or show us. Right now we're in the dark.
I totally agree. To answer your first question is, who determines the return on investment? You do. I'm a taxpayer. I do. When you make a final vote, you're determining the rate of return on either of these projects. The only thing we want to make sure is, in a demolition project, a Facadism project, and an adaptive reuse project, we need to know the cost of everything involved in those projects. And there's going to be things that are non-starter because of the cost. But until we get the cost of all these individual plans and purposes and projects within the three proposals, we can't give you a plan and just come up with estimates. That's not accurate. That doesn't help anybody in this village. We also are not going to include a plan that's not affordable. So what we got to figure out is, in demolition, how much is a demolition cost? Okay, once we know what a demolition costs and what it contains, how much money do we have to spend on a beautification project, like Bill went through, right? All that's going to depend on these line itemized costs, estimated costs. And we will try to come up with a plan to the best of our ability to make it a plan that's, again, legal, practical, and affordable. The Board of Trustees are the ones actually who are going to say, this is what you're going to vote for. Our job is to try to give them great options and try to make sure the public is educated. The public knows what it costs, what it is, and we're not going to get sued.
We all agree. And one last comment. Everything that you had here is the result of resident suggestions. We on our committee did not invent this. So we're now at the end of phase one, where we made a promise that every voice would be heard, including the late voice on pools. Now the next question is, if your voices have been heard, what is the implication of that, and what's the cost of it? I would like to make, however, one comment on the question, I don't use the pool, I don't use this. As a village, we have never been an a la carte village. We all pay taxes for our schools, even though most of us don't have children in school anymore. We all contribute to a number of different services. I don't see that changing. The community that makes Garden City special is people who work for each other. And that's what we're doing tonight. What was your question?
Another question I had is, and I this has been something I've been following for a while, so I apologize if I've been more passionate tonight than normal. But my question to you is, when?
I think that's a great question. So it starts tomorrow night when the issue of cost estimator is before the board. And depending on the answer to that, we will be in a process in which we will have estimations on the first phase. Remember, you heard there are several phases of estimation. And we will begin putting pen to paper. Ryan and we have been working on what potential O&M has been, different potential uses. So we're a fair amount along the road on that. We expect that we will be in a position as a committee to start narrowing costs down in the not too distant future, fairly simultaneous with the cost estimator coming through.
Thank you for your questions. Any other questions before we go home this evening? Yeah.
Hi, Jane Albertson, 147 Greenbrook. Just a question, the cost question obviously is important. The other question that might be something that should be brought to the attention of people in the town are the revenue implications. So somebody mentioned before about community park. So when community park was redone, a lot of people in town might not know that the teams that use the fields there pay fees. And so it brings in revenue, and the revenue can help offset staffing. So depending on what gets approved for St. Paul's, if we have a pool, the pool teams, I assume, would be paying fees to use the pool. Turf, whether it's soccer, lacrosse, birthday parties, the village can get an income based on who's using it. A theater, are we running shows that the residents are paying to attend? So it just may be helpful once that's all put out there in terms of the cost, what programs are going to be running out of there that actually brings revenue back in.
And there's another aspect here. You don't have enough of the demographic in this room, but for many of the parents, 30, 50, who are constantly chauffeuring their children to other communities where they have dance or they have STEM programs or they have athletics, etc. How much time and money is spent on them? And can we bring that revenue back into our village? So there are a lot of different things that are not apparent to this demographic and this group, but for the newer members who don't have to drive 40 minutes every day or however to sign up for an event, something like this would be very attractive.
It seems like some items might be used more frequently. In my experience, I'm going to say that a turf field is going to be used, every day, 7 days a week. So the space, if it gets renovated, or something's just going to be empty, not generating income. Now, might be something people want to know.
I think we would all agree. The village already operates the Recreation Commission already operates some cash flow positive activities. For example, the tennis courts, putting aside capital expenses, the tennis court building in the community park is annually cash flow positive. We would expect that eventually, if a performing arts structure was put in place, one premise would be that it would be by and large cash flow neutral, at least. And I think you'd have to plan it, design it, for example, on the scale of it, to see that happened. There are a number of communities that have performing arts facilities both on Long Island and elsewhere where they are cash flow positive. So I don't think your question is lost on us. I think the awaiting of and the analysis of the activities that we talked about and whether they have revenue opportunities associated with them to offset at least the operating cost is a serious consideration in all cases. Much of the baseline plan that we put forth demonstrates space being allocated to recreation and cultural affairs. They have a lot of programs which are kind of fee-based, And they could generate a lot more fees if they had more capacity. It's their pure and simple. They put out programs and they get full up in terms of their capacity almost instantly. It suggests that if they had more capacity, they could, entertain more users and generate more fees. I think, as Frank and Ryan pointed out, the operating and maintenance calculation for any of the associated or selected activities is an important consideration, not just capital.
Any other questions? Oh, okay, you've been waiting for a while now.
I'm waiting for it, so I'm going to I'm a current senior at the current state high school, and I just want to thank you all for all the hard, very difficult work you've been doing on this project. And I was looking at the readaptive use plan, and I saw a lot of cool facilities in different aspects of those plans that could potentially enrich not only the community, but also the students in our community. And so I just wanted to ask how you have taken the students into account with the readaptive use plan of the community. Would any programs ever be funded with the school budget? How does that play in with restrictions of parkland designation of the site? And I guess it's very close to both middle school and high school, how can this facility be used by students in the future to potentially increase their access to further extracurricular educational activities?
Well, my first answer is, why did I get the mic to answer that question? That's an excellent question. We've done outreach to the student community. I'm sure you're familiar with the View of the Village club, if you will. We've also spent some time with some of the leaders in the school community itself, keeping in mind that, as we pointed out here repeatedly, straightforward educational activities is not a permissible activity technically, with strict translation. That said, the Recreation Commission has a long list of enrichment programs which could be expanded upon, whether that's in the engineering, in the robotics, in the drone club, where you build and fly. There are a lot of activities that the village rec either does in a limited basis or would like to. This is very common in many, many communities, especially upscale communities on Long Island, with the target being the student community and their enrichments. So these are, we've taken this clearly into consideration. We've also reached out to the student ambassadors that are in place in the various property owners association to kind of help us have them become conduit to the committee for the information such as you just mentioned. This is a very important facet of our research. Does that answer your question?
Good to see your recommendation.
So, just so you're aware, one of the critical issues that we debated earlier in our discussion is that the issue of high school, middle school is no longer an important issue. What is now the critical issue is continuing lifestyle of learning. So we're not just talking K through 12, we're talking K through retirement. And how does St. Paul fit within that constant educational process? And a lot of the activities we're talking about here are educational of some point. So it isn't just the regular schools, and I can tell you we are very focused on curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular activities. And we are looking to reach out to our community and find out what those opportunities are, such as the ones we talked about, STEM being the most obvious. But performing arts, athletics, things like that. But we're also looking for people who are now coming out of college or who truly, people who have lost their job and may need new skills, people who are seniors and want to stay active. These are the things that are available here and could be grown into. Okay? And so the other aspect that's very important is the process of learning, pedagogy, is changing. And we think there are very real opportunities for there to be experiments at St. Paul that could follow on into our school system and continue to make sure the Garden City school system is one of the best in the state of New York. Okay? But you're welcome to join us at any time with your comments.
Thank you.
Final thoughts for tonight? Thank you very much. We've been here, I think it's one last question.
Is that correct?
A repeater.
Getting a lot of airtime tonight.
So, Kitchen Spear has put 50% of their own money in a project in Pittsburgh, their own money, that's STEM research. And there's a whole lot of stuff, plans that they're building along with that. So to give you an idea how important that is, and how important it would be for the education of, well, maybe not my children, but someone else's children. And so I think we need to realize the value of what could be done with St. Paul's. I mean, I've been here since 1958, and watched the village, it's the same thing. The elders don't have kids in school, so they don't want to go for the tax increase. I've seen this over and over again. However, and I don't have my kids in school anymore either, but St. Paul's is a gem in the United States, historically, architecturally, and to tear it down would be a crime for the artwork and the things that are in it. And because Mrs. Stewart was smart enough to build that in memoriam of her husband and have it built by famous architects, and the design is unbelievable. So to knock it down would be horrible. And to do a lot of things that people want to do to try and fit at least a few of them in. I think the arts and STEM and maybe the swim pool, but it would definitely raise the value of our homes, because anyone will tell you, people move into this town for one thing. Oh, my kids go to city schools. When I went to school through these walls and I told people about how I was taught, they thought I was in a private school. That's how good the teachers were. And so you got to think about the future of your house value, the future of the children who are here, and what a prestigious place St. Paul's used to be when it was a school, to return it to being a school, and to have arts would be fabulous. So I'm hoping that people go that way, and that's my 50 cents.
And now, you know, have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we'll be back in touch. Thank you all very much for coming to report. And thank you again for the board.